I am so excited for this video because textbooks are a gold mine. And I mean like a literal gold mine, because trying to get information out of a textbook is like walking into a gold mine and trying to walk out with a nugget of gold. Most of the work has been done for you. The mine is built, the textbook is written. But if you walk into a gold mine without knowing how to mine, all you're gonna see is a bunch of rock and dirt, and it's gonna be like, okay, where the fuck is the gold? And if you open up a textbook without being able to read it, it's going to feel like, okay, here are some graphs and some intelligible paragraphs, but where the fuck is the actual information? How do I get what's in here to in here? So in this video, I'm going to tell you how I read textbooks and give you some general strategies so that it doesn't feel like an intimidating doorstep, but what it actually is, one of the best resources you have for understanding your class. So let's get started. This is the textbook I used in my Gen Chem college class, and it's a pretty good standard representation of what you'll see in most science textbooks. And right now we're actually not ready to open it because textbooks are social butterflies. They need to have lots of friends around them. Never open a textbook by itself. This is going to lead you down a sad path of horribly boring reading where you're learning a ton of stuff you don't need to. Only open a textbook to assist you with learning and with your class requirements open and understood. Okay, so here are some of our textbook's friends. We've got our class slides and a practice exam, both of which are courtesy of my freshman college Gen Chem professor, Dr. Mulford. Thank you, Dr. Mulford, for letting me use these. And when you're studying, you should also have your syllabus and any extra practice problems, and also some type of browser open so you can look things up on YouTube. So first of all, just a good thing to understand about learning and studying in general is that a huge part of learning is understanding what topics you'll be learning. No one is ever required to read a whole textbook. At most, I'd say you'll read maybe 40% of any given textbook, and it can be a lot less than that for some courses. So you never want to ever just open up a textbook and start reading. That's a recipe for frustration, extreme boredom, and not really much else. Today we're going to be studying gas laws, so let's open up our textbook to the gas laws chapter and see what we've got going on. And just as an aside, these techniques aren't going to be right for everyone. You know, if you have study techniques that are working for you, keep using them. These are just my notes after many, many years of studying. Also, in this example, I'll be treating it as if your class is already done going over the entire chapter. Sometimes, you know, you're going to start reading the chapter before you finish it in class, so adjust as needed. And the very first thing I do is always a very shallow overview where you're just turning pages quickly, making yourself vaguely familiar with everything in the chapter. So one concept that I wish I had learned sooner was that learning is done throughout many drafts. You're not going to learn any complex concepts in one sitting or one exposure. What makes for good learning is lots of exposures, lots of time passing so that you can start to put together the concepts in your mind. You've probably seen videos like this where a super basic sketch ends up being incredibly impressive, and that's just true across the board for art. Every first sketch looks super rudimentary, but the artist keeps pouring more and more time in, you know, and this is you. Don't be upset when you've studied something one time and your understanding of a concept looks like this and not this. You have to give yourself the extra time and more learning drafts until your understanding can be complete, which is the main reason you have to be studying throughout your entire course and not just a few days before an exam, but that's a whole other video. So on this first overview, all we're trying to do is become vaguely familiar with the content. I look at section headings, any pictures. I really try to connect pictures that look familiar to me because maybe I've already seen them in class. I look at any big formulas that are getting their own space. I look at what areas of the chapter have a ton of practice problems worked out. I'm just trying to get a general overview. Like if you look at a map of the world, you don't know every country, but some of the shapes are starting to come together. And also, this overview serves the purpose of being an unintimidating first step. Since we don't have any hard learning goals here, we're not asking ourselves to actually solve problems, we're just flipping through looking at pictures, it can be a good warm-up to get you in a studying place. You know, anytime you can give yourself an easy studying win, do it. I also, in this overview, figure out what I can probably ignore for the duration of studying. Most students are pretty good at figuring out what they can ignore, so you probably already know these, but basically some parts of these textbooks are there for color or like to explain the history of science, and they typically never help with exams, so I personally ignore them to save time. Usually the beginning is useless, most things on the sidebar, but always double check just to make sure they're not talking about anything useful. And then any big sections that look super different from the rest of the book, and also any complex textbook problems. Overall, textbook back of the chapter problems are pretty useless, which is ironic considering the worked out problems in the middle of the chapter are easily the best resource in the textbook. If your class emphasizes the textbook or doesn't give you practice problems, then go ahead and do them. The simpler problems can be helpful, ones that are basically at the same level as the worked out ones in the middle of the chapter, but pretty quickly they become irrelevant, usually by becoming too difficult in ways that your class just isn't. If you think about an exam, teachers are trying to lay out all the information and test different levels, so they'll create a mixture of problems ranging from easy to very difficult, and there's usually only room for a few very difficult problems. Now, the easy and medium questions on an exam are going to be the same across every class, and that's why the in the middle of the textbook problems are going to be so useful. They're introductory questions that are teaching everyone taking your course across the world the same basic concepts. You know, we're studying gas laws in this example, so we're definitely going to be plugging into PV equals nRT, and that's just going to be across the board for every student learning gas laws. But textbooks do this weird thing where the type of difficult questions they like to ask is just so unlike any course I've ever taken. I think on average they're obtuse, irrelevant, and if you have a good teacher, they're going to want to create their own difficult questions to test you that are directly building on what you covered in class, which makes the textbook difficult questions totally useless for you. Additionally, sometimes the hard end of chapter textbook problems are hard because they're bringing in like a different concept that's not part of your class. Like this is a chemistry textbook, and sometimes the last problems in the chapter will just be difficult because they're bringing in statistics or physics. So it's like, that's not what we're learning here. Like, yeah, sure, you made it harder, but not in a useful way. You know, you just kind of changed the scope and now you're outside of what we're actually talking about. Because you know what matters is that you can do well on your difficult test questions. And to do that, you'll just really have to pay attention to what your specific teacher is interested in and what they choose to emphasize. And your textbook doesn't know who your teacher is, so save your resources and only learn how to do the super difficult problems that your teacher values, the ones that are in the extra practice problems they give you, or from past exams or practice tests. So where is this cutoff between useful and useless end of chapter textbook problems? Hard to tell, you just kind of have to develop a feeling for it by cross-referencing things that look familiar, but basically by the time you're at the very end and you're starting to see vocabulary words you don't recognize at all, you know, once we're in the hundreds of problems, it's a good bet that learning these, while they may be valuable to understanding more science in general, they're not valuable to us with limited time to learn what we need to for the exam. Okay, so after your overview, it's time to get into real studying, which I would describe as a kind of self-hypnosis combined with a careful balancing act. The self-hypnosis is what you need to do to keep yourself engaged. It's very likely that while studying, you wish you were doing something else. Your mind is probably very distracted, thinking about what that something else could be, and how quickly you can stop studying and get to it already. So because we're forcing ourselves to do something that we don't enjoy, we have to really baby ourselves, set up a little snack station, make sure you're ultra comfortable in your favorite chair, make sure you're saying nice things to yourself and not just obsessing about how the last test went wrong or something. And the balancing act you have to do is that it's very easy to push yourself into just full shitting on yourself beratement where you're just like, I'm such a stupid piece of shit, I'll never learn this, look at me, I tried to read that paragraph and it made no sense, everyone else already gets it and I'll never get it. That's just a bad place to be, and you don't want to push yourself there. You're not going to get awesome studying done if that's your mind space. And then on the other hand, it's also extremely easy to push yourself into denial land, where because you are all set up at your study station, you're like, wow, I'm studying. And you tell yourself that you're going to read a page and then watch 5 minutes of a TV show as a reward. So you skim a page, don't understand any of it, and then watch 5 minutes. skim the next page, don't understand one word of anything, lose hope, and then start cleaning your room even though it's been filthy for weeks because it has to get done right now, and then an hour later you pat yourself on the back for studying this whole time. You know, either side of that is just not a good place for you to be, and you need to go into studying kind of prepared to be your own gutter ball railings, where if you go close to either side, you kind of nudge yourself back to center, where you do get to watch TV for 5 minutes after you read a page, but only if you really understand it and it wasn't just a fake gloss over. All this to say, our studying goal after our overview is to start connecting the dots from class to the textbook and to take it really easy on ourselves. Try to give yourself an easier start by starting with a kernel. There are 2 easy kernel types, either something you understand somewhat already or something that intrigues you. The way I would have probably started studying was with something I was confident in and was sure was going to be a big part of the test, like the PV equals nRT problems. You know, it's called the ideal gas law, seems like it'll definitely be on the gas law test. It's in my class notes and practice exam, and I was always comfortable with algebra, so it would be nice to be like, okay, even with nothing else, I know the math going on. In this strategy, I'd find the formula in the book, I'd completely ignore any words around it, and I'd just start trying to go through the practice problems worked out in the book. And it's really important to be really good about this and actually cover up each step until you've attempted it. Don't let yourself skim and see the answer. I'd also do the problems that related to the ideal gas law in the practice exam, and a really good study strategy is to not even try to do the practice exam problems, just try to figure out what concepts they're testing. If you can go through and identify every problem in this test that's main formula is PV equals nRT, that's actually like half the battle right there. If you start with a concept like this, one that you already kind of understand, then when you get stuck, you can turn back to the book, and at this point, I'd probably be ready to actually try to read some textbook text. As a general rule, reading textbook text is more of an intermediate step than a beginner's one. If you're starting from zero, if you feel like you pretty much got nothing out of your lecture, then you're way better off starting with watching a YouTube video, reading your class notes, going to office hours, or asking a friend. Written chunks of textbook text are so incredibly dense that you really want to have some understanding under your belt before you dig into them. Under that setting, if you kind of get what your teacher is saying about a topic and you can already do the very easiest type of problems, then textbook text can really enhance your learning. It's such an awesome resource and is really helpful. I'd also say that when you're at this stage, even with understanding the concept in broad strokes and having successfully done some practice problems, you're going to have to read the textbook text incredibly slowly, and you're going to have to read it multiple times every time. I have a personal rule that I read textbook text a minimum of 3 times very slowly, paragraph by paragraph. And I totally recommend reading it out loud. That's a trick that writers and actors use all the time in their work to make things clear in their own minds. And it's often the only way to force your brain to slow down and not skim. The first reading is just to get a shape of what this is going to be like and look up any SAT words or any technical words that you don't know and try to figure out what the heck they're saying. Then the second reading is to coalesce what you read the first time and start to cement the concept in your mind. And the third reading is to read it again, understanding that this is your first opportunity to really understand what it's saying and to continually ask yourself as you're reading, do I know exactly what they're trying to say? If I had to explain this concept to someone next to me, could I without any bullshit? And this is just the minimum. I've read some paragraphs easily 6 to 7 times before I was satisfied. If you don't understand a paragraph after reading it 3 times, it's really best to go watch YouTube videos, get some more context, and then come back and try to hit it again and say, okay, if I read it 3 more times, do I get it this time? Because eventually it will click. And also remember that the goal is to actually learn all these concepts. So if you're just kind of pretending to learn them or learn learning the surface of them, you aren't building deep enough roots in your own brain to be able to complete problems you've never seen before while you're under pressure on an exam. And if you do get to the point where you've set yourself up for success and you find yourself really clicking and gelling with the textbook text, it's super rewarding and you'll find that you're in a really good position for the test. You know, there are lots of ways to have advantages on tests, whether you just really understand the math or took amazing notes and paid attention to what the teacher was emphasizing. And if you're getting to the point where the textbook is making sense, that means that you really understand the fundamental concepts of what you're learning, which is going to make all sorts of problems on the test more doable for you. So that's the kernel you can use if you already kind of understand something. But if you're not there yet, you can also use the intriguing kernel, which is where you just pick something that grabs your eye and start investigating. For that type of kernel, I'd probably have gone with these weird drawings. They're in the class slides, they're in the textbook, and they're also towards the beginning, so they're more likely to be fundamental and teach a concept throughout the chapter, so we probably have to learn what's up with them before the exam. And this is where I would totally stop trying to use the textbook and go straight to YouTube. The language you're going to encounter in the textbook is so technical that for me, I personally never found it helpful to read it at this point when I was at zero understanding. I would skim until I found out they were called manometers, and then I would immediately type it into YouTube and watch like 2 to 3 videos. After that, I would return to the textbook and then start reading, and if it still felt just as unhelpful, I'd go right back to class notes, friends, office hours, until when I started to read the textbook, it was less overwhelming. But eventually you can get to the point where this paragraph text makes sense, everything is clicking in, and you're really starting to internalize these concepts. You just have to kind of chip away at it piece by piece. But eventually you can get to the point where this paragraph text makes sense, everything is clicking in, and you're starting to internalize these concepts. So yeah, those are the strategies I used. And as you can see, it's really more of a hunt and peck strategy. Do not try to read these books front to back like a normal book. Or I mean, do if that's your thing and you don't find it infuriating, but I don't think most people operate that way. Always use your materials from class as a guide and don't stray off the what was covered in class path. Unless you're already getting an A+ and you just want to do extra, never do any problems or textbook reading that you don't know is applicable to your class. Be nice to yourself while not entering into fake study denial land, or if you do, be nice to yourself about realizing you are in fake study land and that you need to figure out a way to get back to useful studying land. And hopefully, eventually, your textbook will start to feel like a gold mine, but this time you're ready with your pickaxe and headlamp so you can just start extracting those juicy educational nugs.